I tend to use the word maladministration to distinguish even negligent administration from corruption. The key thing about corruption, I think, is that there's almost always a personal benefit involved.
Welcome to the Westminster tradition, where we are unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Robodebt Royal Commission. My name is Alison Lloyd-Wright. I'm a recovering public servant and a managing director of the Good Trouble Group. Joining me today on Kaurna land are my two fellow recovering public servants, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And Danielle Elston of Good Government Advisory.
Hello, Alison.
So today we're going to give a quick update on Robodebt and the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Caroline, can you catch us up on where things are at?
Yeah, so I think the last time we touched base on where things are with the NACC was in our September episode on the APSC findings against those 12 current and former public servants. And I think at that time we said, look, on the 6th of June, NACC had announced it wasn't going to pursue the 6 referred parties, which was 5 public servants and then 1 official, presumably a former minister. And they had announced that I went and looked this up. This is such a good media release. The National Anti-Corruption Commission decides not to pursue Robodebt Royal Commission referrals, but focus on ensuring lessons learnt. Boy, they didn't read the room.
No, it also doesn't meet the test I was taught about the length of a media release title.
But you can tell they're trying to head something off.
Not totally convinced. I've seen a lot of visible application of lessons learned, but sure.
There we go. That's what they said. So anyway, on the 6th of June, the NACC said it wasn't going to take on those 6 officials because the conduct had been fully explored by the Robodebt Royal Commission and they were unlikely to obtain new evidence. They were worried about inconsistent findings between the Robodebt Royal Commission and themselves. They also talked, I love this language, about the oppression involved in subjecting individuals to repeated investigations. And then they sort of said they didn't think it was going to add public interest because there was no remedy or imposition of a sanction and couldn't make any recommendations that the Royal Commission couldn't. So that was what we had. We had a decision that said we're not taking it forward. And right at the end of the press release, they said, and we note that Commissioner Paul Brereton had withdrawn for a conflict of interest. Ensue chaos. Hundreds and hundreds of people calling the NACC saying, this isn't... and so the inspector of the NACC, another entity, took those complaints and said, look, we should have a little look. And they've had a little look. And just recently they've made a finding which wasn't about the content of the decision, but they looked at the conflict of interest management and they decided that a fair-minded observer might reasonably apprehend that the Commissioner's involvement might have impinged on the impartiality of the decision-maker, and they've said, send it back, we'll make another decision. An eminent person needs to make another decision. So that's where we're at. We're waiting for an eminent person to be named.
So,
how do you become an eminent person?
There are endless questions about this asked at estimates, I believe. They were like, how will you define this eminent person? Are you putting your hand up, Danielle? Is that what I'm hearing?
No. I don't think I could pretend to be an eminent person. I just think it's an interesting...
I think at the minimum it requires post-nominals.
Oh, please. That's disappointing. All right. Okay.
So, we'll get into the merits in a moment, or I guess our thoughts on them. Let's start with the conflict of interest, which is a topic that many people don't understand as well as they could. Let's put it that way. That's my generous take. Was there an actual conflict of interest, or was it just a perceived conflict of interest? And does it matter is there a difference?
Well, that's a question for you, right? So, because I would like to hear your thoughts on this, but in the specific case, the inspector is very clear that it was a perceived conflict of interest because Commissioner Brereton, one of the people was well known to Commissioner Brereton. It's pretty clear it's Catherine Campbell and that they were both in the Army Reserves or something together, and so they were well known. And so it was perceived that there was a conflict of interest. Do you think it matters, Alison, if there's a difference between a perceived and an actual conflict of interest? How can you even tell?
I think to the people the decision maker, it's a distinction, but it is not a distinction that is valid for anyone other than the decision. And so I think you may as well treat all perceived conflicts of interest as though they are a conflict of interest.
Not least because don't you think there's a chance that you might not think it's an actual conflict of interest, but actually your conflict leads you to believe that there's not a conflict
I agree
of
that
interest?
perception of conflict of interest is the central component of the trust part, right? That's why we declare conflict of interest. And so I think it's almost like we should get rid of conflict versus perceived and just go, if it's perceived that you may possibly be conflicted, then it exists. Then it's a conflict.
I agree.
So in relation to this perceived or actual conflict of interest, I think what is really striking is how the Commissioner knew straight away there's a conflict, declared it like they got the referral on the 3rd of July and declared it on the 7th of July, right? Like really knew straight away. And nevertheless was extensively involved in almost everything except, as Rick Morton puts out beautifully in his Saturday paper article, for 8 minutes of a particular meeting, is otherwise involved in all of the different parts of the decision-making about whether or not to progress with an investigation. And so, just to give you a sense of how comprehensive the involvement was, contributed to the discussion, settled the minutes, involved in formulating the reasons for the decision, involved in the terms of the media statement, also framed up the legal questions that went for internal advice, also framed up how to interpret the legal advice that was received, just did everything, right? Just everything.
So it's a question not just of declaring your conflict, but how you're going to manage it. And this was
your
then
conduct.
Just saying it out loud isn't enough. Just going back to the question of conflicts, one of the things I have about that is we live in really small worlds some of the time, and the top ends of judiciaries and public services are tiny, 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 tiny worlds. And there are a lot more conflicts than we realise. It's quite a big issue, but also it's not inherently bad. It's actually how you manage it. So I think if we go back to the declaration part of it, the question is we probably have to declare more conflicts than we do as a general rule. And then the question is the management of it. And the management of it isn't just I said it out loud, therefore I'm good to go. It's how much stepping out do you do when you have a conflict, right?
Well, and so I think the Commissioner thought he was doing good management because he didn't make the formal decision, but he kind of explicitly says, he has all these speeches now where he's going out and saying, look, I get, on the one hand, I had a conflict and I declared that, but it would have been irresponsible and negligent of me to abandon my involvement in this very first case before the NACC, that these were such important kind of policy questions that needed to be settled in the first instance. I couldn't just let it go to someone else. So I was managing my conflict by not being involved in the decision, but I was doing the kind of broader policy thinking that's really important for my agency. What do we think about that?
I mean, to build on Danielle's point, there are small circles, and I don't think knowing someone is necessarily a conflict in and of itself. What matters is what are the duties I am supposed to exercise, and to what extent might my ability to exercise those duties fairly and unfettered be impeded upon by my relationship with someone else. So just knowing someone's not enough. And I think if you're going around setting the parameters of the decision, then not making the decision is almost a fiction. Really.
So true, isn't it? I just wonder how much we would care if he'd had all this involvement if they had pursued the
and done the right thing. Yeah.
Look, but isn't the other question that there's added complexity because they were setting the scope of the NACC in the first place? So the fact that it was first decision, it had just been set up, all these new, whether it's a new integrity agency or a new service agency, when you start, you're like, oh, where's our boundary? What are we doing with different things? So, in addition to that, it was well, if I can imagine for a commissioner, if I step out of this, what will that mean for everything that comes after it as to what our scope is in relation to misconduct? what our definitions of corruption are. And I'm not arguing the merits at all, in the sense of
I can appreciate that though.
I disagree with the outcome, but I like, because they were just getting set up, a lot of the questions for them to look at were going to set precedent for what they thought their scope was going forward, presumably.
But see, this is what's so interesting, right? Because I don't know that you can demarcate how. So the particular question he wanted to provide kind of policy guidance on was this question of, can corrupt conduct involve activity where there's no exercise of power, where you're just providing advice, and where there's no private benefit, where it's just, implementing the government's will, right? Like, so that's the policy question that he kind of wanted to kind of stay engaged on and think about how broadly they think about corrupt conduct. But I just think you can't separate his thoughts about whether that is corrupt conduct from the fact that that is being applied to someone that he knows and might or might not respect, and might sort of think, oh yeah, the tag corruption doesn't apply to someone like that in that kind of circumstance. Like, so I think I get why he wanted to be involved, but actually I think even at that policy level, when you have that conflict, perceived or actual, like looking at it from the outside, it feels to me like he's giving a really free pass to people like us. He's kind of taking a very generous interpretation of what corruption might be to let people off.
Yeah. So what? Corruption is just if I benefit financially,
paper bag,
immediately. Yeah, right.
It's what I think of. The first thing I think of when I hear that is, like, I genuinely haven't seen, no, this whole idea that public servants are leaving with brown paper bags with dollar signs on them, I don't think is a crushingly large problem in public services across the country. The things that the APSC found, like not giving your best advice, not giving your minister all the information, look, that
favouring your potential for career progression. Not that there's a direct, it's not even like if you give me X advice, you'll get Y job. It's just a reputation, a vibe, a sense that,
yeah. And so corrosive.
Yeah.
And that means a lot going forward as so far as what he was scoping the NACC for, right? Like, which is Queensland under Sir Joe paper bags, and if it doesn't, what I'm saying there is if it doesn't fit that definition, then it's not the NACC. And I'm like, well, okay, well, that will be scary for like 0.0000001% of things that might exist like that, but what about everything else?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if the APSC aren't willing, like, who is who, right? If the Royal Commission has, in our opinion, rightly identified that is undesirable in senior public.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, I think there's an answer to that, Alison, which is one of the challenges the APSC had was that they couldn't do anything about people who had left the service, which I believe has been changed. Like, they didn't do it retrospectively, but I believe they changed that this year. And so I think that will give them better powers, that you can't just resign.
I mean, what's interesting about the APSC versus the NACC is, so the APSC can make findings about former public servants, and it did, and those 12 that made findings. But what the APSC didn't do was publish the names of the people against who had made findings. And so I do feel like, actually, when we really get to it, what did we want from the NACC? We wanted the NACC to say, you, A, B, C and D, are the people who are guilty of A, B and C. So I think there's something, but in addition to the public servants, it's really important to remember there was a minister. There was a minister involved, and that there is no other remedy for that minister except for in the NACC, although I personally think that maybe this minister is the same person who was referred to the Federal Police for lying before the Royal Commission. And I wouldn't dare imply or malign anyone's names. There's no Newitt Cobbetts who might have been the minister involved who was there. But I do think, one of the things that the NACC really missed a trick on this as well is that there was an opportunity to say out loud the behaviour of that minister was unacceptable.
Or yeah. So
Again, though, that's scope. They clearly don't see that as being their role.
But they've got the legal advice that says it is their role, right? And that's what's so fascinating about the Inspector General report is the Inspector General report publishes some of the internal legal advice about is that or is that not corrupt conduct. And what the internal legal advice says is, yeah, it is corrupt conduct. Like, it's not without possibility that you might be challenged, but within the scope of what the legislation says, absolutely an act of omission done for as simple a personal benefit as career advancement is in scope. So he made a policy choice to say, I don't like that part of my scope and I don't want to go after it. But that's not a legal choice, that's a policy choice.
So now that the Inspector General has completed this report, what's the response from the NACC been?
Fair to say it's been a little bit defensive. They did write a media release where they said, yep, we accept the findings of the report, and Commissioner Brereton has said, I accept that I made a mistake. Then he's given lots of speeches where he's indicated that, judges make mistakes and that's what we have appellate courts for. But here's all the reasons why I made the decision, with a pretty strong implication that he wouldn't do it differently next time, which is always a good sign that you're not making a mistake. And he's also spoken a lot about how important it is to him that the NACC isn't responsive to senses of public outrage, and that he doesn't want the KPI of the NACC to be that that scalps or kind of. So anyway.
I could get that, but also you've got like a pub test thing, right? Which is, why does it exist if there's a sense that the conduct of these people haven't passed the pub test, albeit a niche public service pub in this occasion? Yeah. So I guess what I'm getting at is we've spent more time thinking and talking about Robodebt than the casual observer. To what extent do we feel disappointed in this just because we don't agree with the outcomes? Is it that we don't agree with the outcomes?
I have a process issue more than an outcome issue, which is it's not what I had hoped or expected the NACC scope to be as well as conduct. So I think there is still a big gap between misconduct and corruption, which is where most of the grey operates and is not covered by an integrity body, or could be and isn't, all of those types of things, and that this process and this outcome makes me go, oh, well, that gap still exists.
Or it doesn't. Are you saying they should fill the gap, or you don't care but someone should fill the gap?
I don't care, but someone should fill the gap.
But surely they should fill the gap, right? Like, they were literally created for it. I don't understand why we wouldn't just say they should do it.
With you.
Yeah, okay. But it's interesting because at the time, I think when he decided not to progress with it, at the time I was much more sanguine about it. I think because I thought the APSC stuff was going to be bitier. And so it's like...
And that's my thing. Like, who, where, what, when, as long as someone...
Yeah.
Make sure that there isn't a massive gap in accountability. I think we should beef up like APSC and in the States as well. I think we should go after misconduct a lot more often, and we get so obsessed with the pointy-ass criminal end and corruption.
And the paper bags full of cash.
And I'm like...
When in fact, mostly it's just misconduct. Yeah.
And misconduct is bad. Like, when you said just misconduct, like, sorry, I didn't mean to, but like...
Sorry.
Like,
yeah. But it's not people taking, like, kickbacks from
and I don't know.
Crime.
And so I feel like the outcome of all of this is that we still have this walloping gap in the middle that will not improve accountability if people are like, well, I'm a really good person. I certainly never took $100 from someone to do a procurement. So therefore
I declared every $20 coffee mug I was given. Yeah.
Yep. So therefore the NACC's out of scope for me, and any other misconduct process is both rare and kind of like gentle and whatever else. It gives a lot of confidence to the grey in the middle, right?
Can I ask a potentially dumb question going back to the top of the episode? What remedies does like, what punishment or remedy can the NACC? None.
So what the NACC can do that the Royal Commission couldn't do is the NACC can make a determination. So it can say, I find
Out
that
loud
you
and in
committed-
public.
Yeah, but also it has the legal authority to make that determination. Whereas a Royal Commission, it's the Briginshaw standard and the blah. Like the Royal Commission is kind of an exploratory investigation. Whereas unlike the APSC findings and a NACC finding are a legal power to say, yes, this happened, and thus, they'd all have their lawyers involved, and, the people would get to say, oh, well, I don't agree for X and Y, Z, and then someone determines it. So that is the actual remedy, is that they get to say this was corrupt conduct.
By you named person, and it's now a matter
and you don't
of
get
public
to argue
record.
about it.
And, And, I mean, is that a remedy in and of itself?
I
Small
think it
circles.
is.
And, I think it is too.
Really think it is. Daddy or less sure?
No, not less sure. I just think it's an interesting question that we need to talk about as a set of services and come up with an agreement about what naming, like under what circumstances naming appropriate, like not leaving it to the media to kind of determine what they find out and not find out. Like we don't really have under these circumstances, and if you make these tests, we do public misconduct, and under these, because I would also say there are some things that are accidental, inadvertent, not Robodebt, but other things. There's no kind of bar or temperature with which it's in the public interest versus not in the public interest, I suppose. Now, all of this, I think, is very much in the public interest. I don't think you could argue otherwise. But we don't really have a position, I don't think, on what's in the public interest and what's not.
Well, I think in the NACC's case, because part of their kind of test of they can only look at things that are systemic or serious, and they've got, that's like part of their thresholds. I think in the NACC's case there is, I don't need to go check the ledge, but I assume they can publish about every finding, they can and should publish about every finding that they make, which is different from like an APSC where they don't, right? So I do think there is something there about, like, note there were 12 people in the APSC process, but only 5 public servants in the NACC process, and that I think again reflects that it's a different level of severity and significance, and you would expect those NACC people to have been named if it had got there. Like I have just like a genuine wonder about whether or not, say, Renee Leon was in the NACC process, because you can certainly see how the difference in flavour and tenor of the behaviours along the way might mean that her thing violates APSC but doesn't reach the threshold of what was found in the NACC. So I think, it's interesting. It could almost be exonerating in some ways for people to get one and not the other.
But, can we go back to being an APS 6 who's running procurements or making decisions right now? If we have to spend this long trying to figure out what the accountability framework is, does that mean we've not built one that anyone can follow? Like, what is what? Where does it go? What is the consequence? Like, if we have to talk about it this much, then I don't see how easy it can be to train up and build into, practice.
I feel like the procurement ones are easier. Like, I think this one is
sure.
Sorry,
procurement is easier.
No, but I think it's because because this is the kind of one that it is that we're in the grey space. Like, it's not the perfect first example because it is such a unusual one, and also one that is almost inevitably going to involve very senior people, because you can't, no not senior person by an act of omission is going to be able to create a systemic something like
serious.
So it's like, it is, I do think this is, the NACC is like a different threshold maybe. Whereas an APS 6 who steals money might well get done by the NACC, but again, it's a much easier, they wouldn't be surprised to be caught by the NACC, I don't think.
No.
I do think there's something as well about, I'm just thinking about the ones that we get caught on. Remember the gift cards, the office work gift cards, or the kickbacks that was all of our poor baby procurement officers.
Yes.
They were ASO 2s, ASO 3s, and they were offered what was it for? Was it for printer cartridges?
Printer cards. Yeah, but for printer cartridges.
Yeah. I mean, this all just makes me feel at a more general and kind of the vibe level. It's so interesting how we're very good at catching the junior people who are a bit stupid, but when it comes to the like senior people who are much more sophisticated in the bad doing, we're really bad at working out a way to make them accountable.
That said, a combination of Robodebt, the Royal Commission, and some of the PwC stuff. Like I was hearing from someone who was telling me that last year they sent their government clients Christmas gifts like they do every year, nothing particularly outrageous, nothing particularly expensive, and more than half of them were returned to them.
Oh, good on them. Yeah, go public servants of whatever jurisdiction.
Across the country. This was an across the country thing, not a jurisdiction thing, and they did what they did every year and send out, some nerdy book, a mug, like nothing remotely interesting, right? And on the back of, I think, the last 3 years of much more conversation about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, we're like a bit miffed to be like getting all these return to senders of...
Their family are super pissed to now be getting all these nerdy books for Christmas.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want the art of leadership. I just want a Barbie.
So I think that this has all had a consequence, but I'm not sure that so I think this has had an increased nervousness and a cultural thing and conversations. I'm just not sure that this process with the NACC clarifies any further like what some of the more frameworky scope parts of it are. So I think things are changing, but I think the things that were designed with lots of thinking involved, it's like nothing that all of that did made it someone get a Christmas present and think, oh, I better send that back. That's culture. That's something else.
It is, but I just this is now making me, and I know Alison has been reading the Joe Aston Chairman's Lounge book, so I'm going to throw a little bit to you.
At Caroline's recommendation, and it is my book of the year so far, so get on it.
So good. But that Annabelle Crabb piece about how offended the Prime Minister was about being tarred with the sense that he was influenced by his relationship with Qantas when he's like, I have declared every $20 gift mug I've ever received. Nevertheless, the preponderance of facts make you look at it and you think it does feel like Qantas have got a little bit of a nicer deal from this government. And so I think people can be blind to the ways in which they're persnickety tick boxing. What do you think, Alison?
Yes.
Did you get that feeling?
Oh, I agree. Yeah. In fact, so in the book described as following the letter but not the spirit, right?
Yes.
So of the law or of the requirement. And I think a bit oblivious to those kind of forms of soft influence, which are what is at play here as well.
I really think that. I think the Commissioner does not see how his closeness to one of the people might make him see this conduct differently.
I think
for no other reason than you tend to be close to people that you have something in common with, or that you feel like there's a sense of transference. Like,
yes, could it be
that
me?
could be me. I think that's troubling.
The other thing is that that we have commissioners and royal commissioners as well and whatever else, and we talked about this in setting up inquiries, they are often ex or current judicial officers. And the culture, it's not a culture where you are questioned very often. I note that the Saturday paper raised issues around some of the recruitment to the NACC. And again, it's like to the letter but not the spirit, and not understanding public sector culture of, advertising by merit immediately regardless of kind of there being an out clause and as long as you sign this and whatever else. And so I think some of it is that when we set these things up, they're often headed by people who actually don't understand public sector culture very well, and that what's written on the piece of paper might be slightly different to the expectations of the sector.
All right. So what comes next in appointing someone to remake the decision, and to what extent do we think they'll be dealing with some of those things that were, again, up the top of the episode, worried about the oppression of subjecting individuals to repeated investigations?
I mean, it will be a brave, eminent person who is overly worried about the oppression repeated investigations. I just this is just a fact that I liked because I had forgotten this, that again in the Saturday paper there was reporting that they had looked at Justin Gleeson, the former Solicitor General, and decided they couldn't appoint him because did you guys remember that he quit as Solicitor General because the Attorney General had created a rule that all requests for advice from him as Solicitor General had to go through the AG's office. And I was just like, oh, I'd forgotten that, but excellent reason to quit. So anyway, they're now trying to find another eminent person who has not had a fight with the former coalition government. Good luck.
I was going to say that's a recruitment process and a half, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think, sadly, actually, the next steps, what this may mean is that we never get to see the sealed chapter because there was a real chance we were about to get. So Mark Dreyfus had talked about releasing the sealed chapter, and then the inspector's decision came in reversing the NACC decision, and he was like, oh, no, we have to wait till that finishes. And so if we have a change of government, I suspect the new government would be less inclined to release the sealed chapter. And so, this may mean that that window of opportunity is passed.
And then there's a question, though, of not is that important, but are we all getting tied up in our own, outcomes are different, accountability is important, and I wouldn't want it to be the unpicking of the NACC at the expense of are we doing welfare payments properly? Have we, these things can be a little bit inside baseball. Aside from the need for accountability for anyone involved in Robodebt, whether we see the sealed section or not, I'm not sure that changes some outcomes.
I wildly disagree. I think on this one alone, on any other public service scandal, I'm totally with you. But on this one alone, I think the groundswell of people who were actually impacted by Robodebt and want to see a head on a pike and have not seen one, I think there is just a real feeling that the institutions are set up to protect the powerful and that's all they've seen so far. So, to me, it's really important for faith in governance. And when Commissioner Brereton stood before that parliamentary committee and essentially said, well, I think everyone would have more faith in the NACC if you'd all stop criticising me, I just thought, yeah, thanks a lot, Franco. That's not how this works, actually.
Yeah, and I do think in the sense of families who lost someone as a result of being issued a Robodebt letter, it's not sufficient to them to say the system did it.
Yes.
Right? They want to point at some people and say your actions contributed and caused this particular harm to me.
And to be clear, so do I. I'm just, this many years in, I'm also keen to make sure we never do it again and want to make sure we're spending as much energy on that part of it.
All right, till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.